doing Shaylene's part, Lauren?
Yeah, I just started it.
Okay.
Ready?
Go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our debate discussing the use of restraints and seclusion. In this debate, we will be discussing both the pros and cons regarding the use of restraints and seclusions. With us in the debate today, supporting its use is Jennifer as attacker, Lauren as the prover, and Sony as the stater. On the opposing position, we have myself, Shailene, as the starter, and Nadella as the prover and attacker. During the debate, each side will have a turn to discuss their position on the matter. We will begin with the proponents as they discuss their findings to support their position. Following, the opponents will have an opportunity to defend their standing on my signal to counter. Each side will have approximately 5 minutes to state their position and evidence. We will now have Sony speak on the findings of their position.
Hi, everyone. First, I would like to begin by defining restraint and seclusion. Vollmer et al. In 2011 in the Association for Behavior Analysis International Position Statement on Restraint and Seclusion provided definitions, which we will be using today. Restraint involves physically holding or securing the individual either A, for a brief period of time to interrupt and intervene with severe problem behavior, or B, for an extended period of time using mechanical devices to prevent otherwise uncontrollable problem behavior, for example, self-injurious behavior, that has the potential to produce serious injury. Seclusion involves isolating an individual from others to interrupt and intervene with problem behavior that places the individual or others at risk of harm. When it comes to restraints, an individual must be trained in procedures to use protective holds, blocks, transport, or escort an individual safely. The safety of the client always comes first, but we must also consider the safety of others as well. Furthermore, when dealing with aggressive or self-injurious behaviors, all the relevant people in the client's life should be trained to deal with those behaviors. For example, the Davis et al. 2013 in the Peer Training Manual, How to Avoid Seclusion and Restraint state, while preventing a crisis is a mutual goal, there are times when our efforts are not successful, and more restrictive measures such as seclusion and restraints may be necessary to prevent imminent harm. Although CPI provides training on de-escalation skills and prevention, which can, in some cases, reduce the need for restraint or seclusion, even they realize there may be instances where restraints or seclusion may be necessary, again, in cases where imminent harm to self or others are involved. Again, I would like to stress the importance on the correct use of restraint or seclusion. We are not proposing restraining an individual for overturning a table once and calmly sitting down. We are advocating the use where the individual poses an imminent danger to himself or herself and others in the immediate vicinity. Also, as I stated earlier, the use of restraint may improve the quality of life for an individual who engages in, for instance, eye gouging. When all other strategies have been tried and failed, restraint and seclusion become necessary to prevent imminent harm. We do not want to harm our clients, but we also cannot sit back and watch or allow them to harm themselves. As I stated, our position is that restraints and seclusion should be used as a last resort per Code 4.08c. Those who will be applying these strategies need to be properly trained to prevent injury to the client and themselves. Sorry about all that. I don't know what's going on. Also, protocols should be in place for the removal of these procedures as quickly as possible, as stated in Code 4.08d. Decisions should be informed by the data and not an emotional response. As behavior analysts, we have an obligation under Code 1.01 to rely on scientific knowledge, and Code 2.09 relates to treatment efficacy. Clients have a right to effective treatment, which may include restraint and/or seclusion based on the literature per Code 2.09a. Furthermore, Code 1.05f state personal beliefs about restraint and seclusion should not compromise, in quotes, compromise their duty to provide effective treatment per Code 2.09a and c. To support the use of restraints and seclusion, the following points will be discussed: the history of the use of restraints and seclusion and its use in imminent danger to self or others, the quality of the clients and their families' lives, and the issue of do no harm. Shailene, back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, I keep going.
Opposed to the idea of using restraints and seclusion, we have done thorough research and have identified cases in which the use of physical restraints has caused serious injury to the individual. With the series of events in which restraints weren't used appropriately and without proper training, we stand firm in our stance that restraints and seclusion should not be an option. To ensure the safety and dignity of the clients in which we work with, to support our stance, we will be presenting the following points. Sunland, Miami case in which individuals were mistreated and the use of restraints and seclusion weren't used with appropriate training and protocols. Wyatt v. Stickney case, which addresses rights for individuals with mental disabilities to receive effective and proper treatment. On this topic, we might also consider the companies that have been created to address aggressive behaviors because the reality is that they do exist. We might consider CPI, QBS, and all other safety care certifications that have been set in place to address these. Across all companies, prior to the implementation of restraints, it is very crucial to implement de-escalation procedures as well as antecedent management. Antecedent management being of the most importance, as well as we want to prevent escalation, not only address the situation once a crisis has been reached. There are many events that have led to the ongoing debate upon this topic, to also include a study by Ray, Myers, and Repapot. In this study conducted, 1,040 individuals completed a survey on their treatment at a psychiatric facility. From this study, about 73% of the individuals reported that upon the implementation of restraints and seclusion, they were not dangerous to themselves or others. They reported that the staff had said their behaviors were inappropriate but not dangerous. The rest of the respondents reported only saying that their behaviors were not dangerous at the time. Okay, then to me. I myself, as well as many of the people in this debate, have worked with individuals who engage in self-injurious and harmful behaviors to others. The question we all want to answer is, how do we make sure our clients and others around them remain safe? When these behaviors occur, it is our responsibility as professionals to make sure that clients do not harm themselves and or others. It is the opinion of the pro side of this debate that the safest and most efficient way to do this is by utilizing the use of appropriate seclusion and restraints. That is not to say that professionals should engage in seclusion and restraint practices by default. However, when appropriately employed, both technically and in response to self-injurious and harmful behaviors to others, seclusion and restraint is the safest and most evidence-based option. I would like to begin by defining what least restrictive environment means in the eyes of special education community. IDEA defines least restrictive environment by saying that your child should be with kids in general education to the maximum extent that is appropriate. They continue by stating that special classes, separate schools, or removal from the general education class should only happen when your child's learning or attention issues, his disability under IDEA is so severe that supplementary aids and services can't provide him with an appropriate education. The word that I think we all need to hone in on is appropriate and what appropriate means. As a special education teacher, I have developed countless IEPs, and each plan has been individually tailored to what is deemed appropriate for the given child. I have had students that were able to operate within general education setting without support, as well as those severe cases where it was in the best interest and the safety of the student, as well as his or her peers, for the student to be in a secluded classroom. An IEP team consists of all related school specialists, the family, and if old enough to attend, the child. The law requires that a family is invited to the IEP and that they are contributing members of the plan set in place. That being said, families are more than aware and comfortable with the environment, accommodations, and modifications made to the child's day in order to make sure the child is receiving an appropriate education. What the team decides is appropriate for each child will greatly vary depending on the scenario. In some cases, the most appropriate placement is in a secluded setting from peers. This decision is not made lightly and is only considered when there is sufficient data to support that the child cannot be successful and or safe in a setting with his or her peers. The second thing that I want to discuss is the development of FBAs and BIPs. Some students require additional meetings when when they present with behaviors that are so intense they require an FBA or a BIP. Again, in these cases, families meet with school specialists and sign off on behavior plans that are developed. In some cases, seclusion and restraint are part of this behavior plan. This is the last resort measure that ensures no one gets hurt. The point of the plan is to establish what a student's triggers are and how the situation can be de-escalated before it turns into a scenario where seclusion and restraint practices are necessary. The plan may include antecedent interventions, reinforcement schedules, incentives, replacement behaviors, etc. The plan will also include specific language that adults should use or not use when attempting to de-escalate the situation. If the situation moves into a crisis in which the student is harming themselves or people around them, then and only then, seclusion and restraints should be employed. Supporting this claim, myself, Sony, and Jen found a study that was conducted by Richard Fox and James Mindell in which a behavior plan was created to address the aggressive behaviors of a 13-year-old boy with autism. The plan put in place included consistent and frequent positive reinforcement, a token system, allowed for the child to make choices, response cost, overall correction, and when needed, physical restraint. With this plan, the boy's aggressive behavior decreased to 0 or close to 0 incidences, and the boy was able to make sufficient growth in many academic areas as a result. In addition, these results have been maintained for over a year. Seclusion and restraint was used in this study when appropriate and in response to self-harm or harmful behaviors to others, and contributed to the success of the behavior plan, not to mention kept the child and others safe. Next, I'd like to discuss the technical act of seclusion and restraint. First, all professionals working with children who have the potential to go into crisis behavior which result in seclusion and restraint must be properly trained. There are many different kinds of programs that exist, including CPI, PTM, etc. I worked in schools and behavior clinics, and in each of these places, my employers have made this a requirement of my employment. These practices follow the idea that seclusion and restraint are a last resort scenario and stress the importance of my above description, which includes other interventions put in place to de-escalate the child before the child needs to be secluded or restrained. In this training, one learns how to safely restrain and transport a child so that the child is not harmed in any way. The technicality of these restraints have been modified and changed over the years in order to make them efficient and safe for each person involved. When professionals follow least restrictive environment laws, conduct and create proper FBAs and BIPs, as well as get training on the proper ways to employ seclusion and restraint, the use of seclusion and restraint is effective and safe to use with children who are engaging in self-injurious and harmful behaviors. The use of restraints allows BCBAs to follow the ethical guidelines created for us by doing no harm to our clients, relying on scientific knowledge, maintaining competence through professional development, describing conditions for behavior change program success, and considerations to regarding punishment procedures. And then back over to Adela.
Okay. Okay, so it all started in Florida in the early 1970s with the Sunland Miami scandal, where it demonstrated clearly how individuals with developmental disabilities were abused in inhuman ways in the hands of the so-called professionals. In 2003, the Wyatt versus Stickney case initially began so that conditions could be brought forth in institutions with developmentally disabled people, but it quickly led to deinstitutionalization and treatment in the least restrictive environment. There are many unanswered questions to, is the use of restraints and seclusion ethical? Some of the questions are, what are the benefits of restraints and seclusion? What are the consequences of restraints and seclusion? Is there an appropriate age where restraints and seclusion began? How many people are injured or killed by restraints and seclusion? How effective is restraints and seclusion? Does restraints and seclusion actually change behavior? What qualifies for restraints and seclusion? Who or what professional decides the qualifications of seclusion and restraints? And so we have a video that we're going to play to see moving forward from the 1970s to a recent video that we all can see I think Shailene, I don't know if I'm going to do a signal or something for you to play it. How will that go?
I'm playing it, right?
You're playing it, Shailene?
Okay, I can.
But we don't have to play it right now.
Okay.
We're not playing it.
But
I mean, we know
we're
it's
trying to time it, right?
Yeah, we know it's 10 minutes. So let's
Okay,
say
so
it's
then
done. And
you're
then,
done.
I just try and make sure
as
it,
we can
it
see,
flows
nothing good
smoothly.
comes out of restraints and seclusion. Restraints and seclusion and all the training requirements and protocols, professional and ethical compliance codes for behavior might look good on paper and may sound good in theory, but unfortunately is a very sad and different story in practice.
Should we play the video to make sure it plays?
Yeah, but I think Shailene was going to take care of the videos, right?
Here, let me try it. Let me just try it really quick.
I can't hear
Guys,
her.
I'd rather know now.
And I'm going to stop my timer real quick.
Shocking cases like this one have been reported to Congress of special needs children under restraint getting hurt and even killed. Here's CNN Special Investigations Unit correspondent Abby Boudreau.
Christopher, out for a walk. That spin? A sign of autism. No one argues this teenager has been a very difficult child to manage. But here he is again.
Can you guys hear it?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't hear it.
Oh, I can hear the whole
can
thing.
hear it, but
Okay, wait. I'm going over to Sony for Jen's part.
Oh,
Or Sunny.
okay, sorry.
Oh, what I do?
While it is correct that there were cases such as Sunland in Florida where there were misuses of restraints and seclusions, it is also very important to remember that this occurred in 1972, and there are many differences between the techniques that were being used then and what is being used now. Due to the atrocities that took place at Sunland, the Blue Ribbon Committee was formed. The Blue Ribbon Committee investigated the situation at Sunland and then made recommendations in order to prevent any similar situations in the future. Some of the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Committee were to allow unannounced visits to residential institutions. Additionally, they recommended professional peer review of all behavior programs to ensure that the behavior programs were derived from the literature and not simply experiments being performed on clients. The committee also recommended abandoning seclusion and using positive and appropriate timeout techniques instead. While Sunland was a horrific situation and a clear abuse to the clients that were supposed to be treated, the result of the Blue Ribbon Committee and their recommendations led to the promotion of the Code of Ethics for Behavior Analysts. These codes of ethics have promoted safe and effective treatments to be implemented and have looked out for the rights of the clients being treated. Without Sunland, we may not have the professional and ethical compliance code for behavior analysts that we now use. The video concerning the teenager at the Princeton House Charter School in Orlando, Florida, further shows the importance of having an increase in training, observations, and stronger policies in regards to the use of restraints and seclusion. Congressman George Miller, who is the chairman of Education and Labor, raises three great points regarding the misuse of restraints: the need for parental involvement, the need for more training, and the need to assess the data. Firstly, Congressman Miller questions whether the parents were informed or aware of the restraint procedures that were being used on their son. According to Ethical Code 4.04, parents need to give informed consent before the use of restraints can be used. Secondly, he talks about the need for more training, which is outlined in Ethical Code 4.08d. While it is mentioned in the school that the teachers at the school were trained using PCMA, the director at the PCMA training comments that the procedures were being used after only one incidence of the behavior, but they were trained to only use the restraints after multiple episodes of the problem behavior. This discrepancy shows the need for ongoing training as well as supervision to ensure the correct procedures are being performed at all times. Congressman Miller adds that it is important to train not only the teachers, but the aides, substitute teachers, bus drivers, and anyone else who may come into contact with students who have interfering behaviors in the school setting. Finally, Congressman Miller discusses the need to assess the data and make alterations depending on whether the treatment is working or not. He mentioned the same techniques were being used over and over without looking to see if these techniques were working or not. According to Ethical Code 2.09D and 4.08D, the BCBA is responsible for reviewing the data and making changes depending on the upward or downward trend of the data points. It is appalling to see such infractions occurring to anyone, but it is important to remember that these infractions are occurring in the school districts, which are not required to follow the ethical and compliance codes laid out by the BACB. These situations of Sunland and Princeton House show us the importance of having these ethical codes to ensure the safety and best practice for the clients. We can also see that restraints and seclusion should only be used as a last resort, with parental consent and under the training and ongoing supervision of a BCBA. When following these rules, restraints and seclusions are effective at reducing the dangerous and severe behaviors so that the client and their family have the opportunity for a better life. Monica?
Lauren and the pro side mentioned the need for defining the topography of the behavior and using the least restrictive procedures. However, we have seen multiple cases where neither of these happen. We have seen the misuse of these procedures where schools claim that physical restraints are only used in emergency situations, but there is evidence that they are used for many other behaviors that do not constitute emergencies, such as non-compliance. There's also evidence of seclusion being used as a timeout procedure with the intentions of using seclusion as a consequence for inappropriate behavior with the intention of reducing the behavior. However, if the behavior is still occurring, the punishment is not working. It's not working and needs for least restrictive procedures being used. There is little empirical evidence to confirm possible advantage of using restraints or seclusion in the education setting. On the other hand, there is empirical evidence to support the use of proactive positive behavioral plans rather than the reactive use of restraints and seclusion. According to Ethical Code 2.09A, we need to rely on the current research and employ the treatments that are proven to work and be effective. Additionally, what the pro side fails to mention is a number of severity of cases of restraints and seclusion that have caused physical and emotional harm to the clients. One of the core ethical codes states that we do not harm. However, that is not the case when using restraints and seclusion. First of all, most of the cases that use restraints and or seclusion are in children with disabilities. When working with children with disabilities, we need to remember that these children learn differently. These children may not know what the appropriate behavior is. They may not know what is right or wrong, or the wrong or right way to act. And if the restraints or seclusion are not being implemented in a contingent and consistent manner, they may not know what they are being punished for. Furthermore, children with disabilities may not be able to express their feelings or fears after the use of restraints or seclusion. When interviewing children in mental institutions about the use of restraints and seclusion on them in these institutions, they express feelings of anger, anxiety, confusion, depression, helplessness, and despair. We cannot say that children with disabilities are not feeling these same emotional harm after they are exposed to restraints and or seclusions. A 4-year-old girl in West Virginia was strapped in a chair with multiple leather straps that resembled a mini or a miniature electric chair. She was later diagnosed with PTSD after this restraint due to her frequent temper tantrums that began occurring and frequent bedwetting. Additionally, a 13-year-old boy in Atlanta, Georgia, committed suicide by using a rope after being left in a seclusion room for several hours. The pro side mentions wanting to keep the client safe. However, we have to question the safety these procedures when it leads to short and long-term physical and emotional harm to our clients.
As we
Jamie?
stated, thank you. As we stated previously, the use of restraint and seclusion is a last resort. Per Code 4.08a, reinforcement procedures are always recommended whenever possible. The Fox and Mendel study, which Lauren pointed out, show that the appropriate use of restraint as part of a behavior plan can be effective in decreasing dangerous behaviors. As Lauren pointed out, the use of restraints and seclusions need to be done by professionals who have had the training necessary to do a proper restraint. Those cases mentioned by Adela and Monica are cases that are, yes, very tragic. Although those people may have been trained, they were not properly supervised, and that is under BACB Code 2.0, 4.08. I'm going to get to that one. Sorry. Menon, Babaraj, and Bernard also reviewed research evidence on the use of restraint as an intervention with children. They found restraint interventions were widely used to manage challenging behaviors. Due to that, they suggested the use of debriefing procedures to aid in the reduction of the use of restraints when its use may be influenced by staff morale or attitudes. In closing, Jennifer, Lauren, and myself would like to stress we are not advocating the use of restraint and seclusion as a default treatment. Alternative treatments must have been tried and failed. The use of restraint and seclusion is a last resort with treatments individualized and the function of the target behavior. Vollmer et al. 2011, the U.S. Department of Education, Davis et al., they all agree. There may be instances where restraint and seclusion may be necessary due to the dangerous nature of the behavior to themselves or others. As behavior analysts, treatments must be based on the literature per codes 2.01 and 2.09a, and we must maintain competence by reading the appropriate literature per code 1.03. Due to the harmful effects of restraint and seclusion, we must adhere to code 4.08a through D, which outlines considerations regarding punishment procedures. Thank you.
I can't hear you.
I
Sorry.
can't hear. Wait, Shailene, we're gonna read it.
Can't hear you.
We're gonna read it.
Oh, Shailene's on mute.
Oh, she's
Oh, I'm
on
sorry,
mute.
I was on mute. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. Sorry. We're here. Okay. Donista and Annette reported on
I still
efforts
can't
to
hear
reduce
her.
seclusion. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Lauren?
No?
Can anyone else hear me?
I can hear
I
you.
can.
Okay. Well, I'm
I
gonna
can't
read
hear
them.
you, but that's okay.
I'm gonna go. It was similar to what we would do in the field of ABA, but it's something to consider. One of the first things that we looked at was the criteria for review for a case in which seclusion and restraints was implemented. In ABA, I think that after the first instance in which it appears that an individual may be dangerous to themselves or others, or may have a history of causing harm to themselves or others, that they should be placed in a setting that would prevent the use of restraints until data shows stabilization. With this in place, it would prevent the need for restraints to be used to protect others. In the event the individual is causing harm to themselves, I believe there are other ways in which it can be prevented without using restraints. For example, I've worked in a home in which an individual engaged in headbanging. Restraints were not a part of the behavior plan, as parents did not approve. Instead, body pads and guards were used to block the head from surfaces that could cause harm. Looking at this situation, I think it also brings an important point across, and that is that engaging in restraints can also cause more harm to the people implementing it versus the individual engaging in it. For example, in the event the individual that is engaging in dangerous behaviors is bigger than the person or persons trying to implement a restraint, they may also be able to cause more harm, whereas they can protect themselves as well as the individual by using blocking methods and de-escalation methods. There are many cases and events in which parents do not consent to the use of restraints and seclusions, and in these events, alternatives must be considered. As the opposing side has mentioned, times have changed and there are more laws and regulations protecting the rights of individuals and ensuring that there is proper training in place, as well as consent before a restraint or seclusion procedure can be performed. In conclusion, the use of restraints and seclusion is controversial, and both sides have presented valuable data data and statistics, which allows us to have a better understanding to support the evidence behind each stance. There are considerations to be made before the proper use of physical restraints and seclusion can be addressed. Of the importance, we must always consider Ethical Code 4.09, which states, behavior analysts review and appraise the restrictiveness of procedures and always recommend the least restrictive procedures likely to be effective. With this in place, the least restrictive procedures might not always be effective in keeping the individual and others around them safe. There are protocols and ethical guidelines that must be followed before a procedure involving physical restraint should be implemented. As mentioned, it is important to be proactive in implementing antecedent prevention strategies and de-escalation strategies. From research and studies, we are all aware of the correlation between behaviors and antecedents. Therefore, in trying to decrease the probability that a crisis will occur, it is important that we take the necessary precautions to prevent them and teach replacement behaviors proactively. The end.